Aligning your layers and your content in Photoshop is very important, and for that we have a lot of options we can use. First of all, you can work with guides. To add guides very easily, you can use the rulers, which you can show from the view menu. You can find rulers here, or use the keyboard shortcut, which is Command R or Control R on PC. Once you have the rulers, you can drag the guides out. So for example, if I want to align this text to each other, I mean these numbers, to make sure that they are on the same baseline, I can use a guide for that. Or if I want to make sure that something is aligned to the left, I can drag a vertical guide from the left ruler, and I can drag it here. I can also create guides in another way. I can go to the view menu and I can click on New Guide. Once I click on this, I can create a guide on an exact position. So if I want to create a vertical guide, let's say on the 100th pixel, and I click on OK, then it will be placed there. Once you want to move a guide, you can hold down Shift to snap it to specific points in the X values. So for example, this vertical guide can now snap to 150, 30, 40. So these numbers in the ruler will be used to snap to. And that you can do with holding down Shift. So if I don't hold it down, then I will get these different numbers. It won't be an exact number like 270 pixels, for example. If you alt click on a guide, you can turn it into the other direction. So from a vertical guide, I can create very quickly a horizontal guide, and vice versa. Of course, you can always hide the guides if you don't need them. So you can go to the view menu and you can go under show and turn off guides. Another very useful option is the grid, which again you can turn on or off from the same area. So view, show, grid. And the increments of the grid can be set in the preferences. So if I go into preferences, guides, grid and slices, here I can find the options for the grid. So first of all, we can change the color of it, and then we can choose the grid line increments and also the subdivisions of that. And instead of lines, we can also use dashed lines and dots. So if we just choose dashed lines, and I click on OK, you can see it will be a little bit different, the division of this grid. Also in the preferences, there's an option under the general where you can find snap vector tools and transform to pixel grid, which is again a very essential and useful way to make sure you align everything to the pixel grid. So whenever you use vector tools or transformations, you will always be able to align things to the pixel grid. So that's also very important to have enabled. Using smart objects for repeated elements is also very important. In case you use the same element several times in your PSDs and you want to make sure it's consistent, then you should first of all create a smart object from it and then start duplicating it. So as you can see in this example, we have the same icon 3 times. And if I decide to change its color, for example, then I will probably have to go through all of them one by one. So there's the icon itself, and if I double click on that, I can change its color, and then we can see it update. But it won't update on the other two, because they are not linked or connected in any way. But let me switch to this other example where I already have them set up as a smart object. So all these 3 icons are originating from the same smart object. So if I go into that smart object itself, so double clicking on it, I access the source, and here I change the color to red, and then I save this smart object. So I go to File, Save, and then go back to the document. As you can see, it's already updated on all 3 instances. That can save a lot of time, and also file size can be reduced with this technique. Grouping your layers is very important also to make your whole PSD file more organized and also to save yourself time. fastest way probably to group your layers is to first of all select the content you want and then press Command G or Control G. So for example, if I select all of these together here and I press Command G, I will create a group. And then I can double click on the name and rename it. So this can be the sidebar, for example. Now, instead of going into these groups and one by one changing their size in case I need to, I am going to also use a shared mask on the main group. So this group here outside, which I just created, the main group which holds all of these elements together, can have a mask which will affect everything inside it. So in case I need to change the width of this sidebar, I wouldn't go in one by one changing it. So for example, change the dark background, first of all use free transform, change it, and then go into all of these like the photos and then select that base and again change the width of it. Instead of this, I'm going to use masking. So I just go back a couple of steps, and instead of using any of these layers one by one, I'm going to select the main layer group, the sidebar group, and on that I'm going to create a vector shape, which at the moment I selected the rectangle shape and I set it to path mode. Then I draw the shape itself, which can be bigger than the original size, it doesn't matter at this stage. And then I'm going to command click or control click on the add vector mask icon here at the bottom of the layers panel. That will add this shape as a mask to my layer group. So as you can see now, there's the vector mask added there. And if I use the free transform tool and make changes to the vector mask, it will affect all the layer groups and layers inside this sidebar group. So that's a much more efficient and faster way of affecting all of these layers at once. Naming and coloring your layers and layer groups is also very important. Once again, because it can save time whenever next time you need to find a layer, and also in case you are working in a team and you have to share your PSD files with other designers or especially developers, then it's very important to guide them through your layer structure with your layer naming and coloring. So if you are consistent and make sure you name all your layers, that will help anyone else who will have to use your PSD files. So in this case, for example, I have a group here which is just called background copy 4. Now that's not really good to use because it doesn't really say anything about this group. So if anyone wants to see what's inside it, the best way is to just simply turn it off and turn it on again, and that will show exactly what's inside the group. But to help anyone else who's going to use this PSD, I'm just going to call this graph section. So that's already tells what's going to be inside this layer group. And then under this, I can again find a couple of layer groups like BTN31. That's again not really descriptive. So I can check, that's the little X button there. So I can either call it close button or X button. I'm going to call it close button. Again, I have an untitled copy. Now that's definitely not a good way to name that layer group. So I'm just going to call this numbers. And then here I have a couple of other layer groups. I can see dots, bars, grid, and then group 18, which is probably should be called background. So I'm just going to rename that. And then I can see that this actually can be joined into one layer group. So I just select all of them and group them together and call it graph. So now it's much easier to see what's happening here. So if anyone comes into the graph section, they can first of all check the whole thing, close and open it again, or hide and show again. Then the close button, then the numbers, there's the item name separately, and then the graph itself. If I want, I can also separate the background by just dragging it down a little bit here in the layers, and then now it's not inside the graph group, but separately outside of it. So I can see as the background and the graph separately divided into two layer groups. If I want to make it easy to find specific parts of my design, I can also highlight them with colors. So you can select a layer, right click on it, and from the context menu you can choose any of these color labels. So if I choose, for example, orange, then that color will show up here, and it will make it very easy when we filter for these layers. So if there's a couple of layers that you want to make sure it's very easy to find, you just simply label them. And then if anyone chooses color for filtering layers, then they can very quickly and easily find those layers that you labeled with these colors. When you work with text in Photoshop, you should also consider a couple of things. First of all, you should never free transform text. Or even if you use free transform, make sure that you use a whole number. So let me show you what happens if I use free transform on text and I apply it. Now it says 91.52. That's not really a good way of resizing text, so I should change this to 90 points. So that will keep my design more organized. And of course, I can always go back and change it back to 60 points if I want to. And then once again, remember, using guides is a good way to align your text, so, or any of your layers. So I just align it back where it was. The other thing which you should consider whenever you change the size of the text, even if you use free transform, is that you should always keep it the same proportions. So never stretch text. That's even worse than just holding down shift and resizing with free transform. If you really want to use free transform, make sure you use the shift when resizing the text. So that will keep the text in proportions. And another thing which you should make sure you do with text is that you use character styles. So for example, in this case, I have 3 versions of the text here. And if I save this as a character or paragraph style, I can very easily change it, the style itself, the definition, and then it will update on all the instances where I used it. So if I have this text selected here, I can go to the window menu and choose paragraph styles or character styles and create a new one. If I double click on this, I can already see that all the attributes are saved here. So I can call this numbers. I'm going to click on OK. And now if I select this next one, I can also add numbers to it or select numbers. And then I click on override or clear override. Then it means now I have the same style applied to both of these layers. And then I can select this third one as well, select numbers and clear override. So now what I can do is to double click on numbers, and here I can change any of these properties. So if I change my mind and I want to use ultralight italic, I can change to that, and all 3 numbers or text layers will update. Again, I can change it to thin, and then it will update very easily. So I don't have to do it one by one. It can be updated like this using a paragraph or character style. And last but not least, with text, what you should also know is that to make sure whenever you use paragraph text, when you have a text frame, make sure that you don't have this unnecessary empty space. So if I drag this up here and just use the text box which fits to the content, then it will make it easier to make selections. Because if it's bigger, then it will overlap other text frames, and that can be a problem whenever you want to work with the text. So it's good to make sure it fits the text. Of course, make sure you don't make it too narrow when you will have overset text, but just make it big enough to fit all the text in your text layer. And when you're ready with editing the text, you can use the keyboard shortcut Command Enter or Control Enter on PC to accept the changes. Whenever you have several versions of the same design, instead of saving several PSD files and sending those to your clients or to developers, try to use layer comps instead. Make sure the developer or your colleagues know about how to use layer comps, but essentially this is something that you should set up in the first place. So let me show you how this works. In this case, I would like to save 2 different versions of the same design. First of all, I would like to call this white top bar with dark graph background. So if I go to the layer comps panel, which is under the window menu, layer comps, I can create that already because this is the way it will look like. So I have the layers turned on in a way I would like to save this composition. So I'm going to click on this, and here I choose visibility, position, and appearance in case I want to save all of these into the layer comp, or I can just simply choose visibility. Because in this case I won't move the layers around, I'm just going to use visibility. So I'm going to call this white top bar with dark graph background. I can type that in as well. Okay, so that's already saved. I'm going to copy this text because I'm going to use something similar soon. I'm going to click on OK, and it already appears here in the layer comps panel. Now I'm going to turn off this layer, which will make the background of the graph brighter. As you can see, turning it off made it a bit brighter. And I'm going to turn off the top bar white layer group and turn on the top bar blue. As you can see, that's different now. So I'm going to create a new layer comp, and I'm going to call this blue top bar with bright graph background. I'm going to again click on OK. And now if I want to switch between these two, I can just simply click on these layer comp options. So that will make it much easier for anyone else who's going to work with these files. Instead of saving two separate PSD files, I can just simply use these layer comps in one Photoshop file. And the advantage of doing this is that I can still make changes to things like, let's say, the item name here. I can just type in statistics, and still my layer comps will work just fine. So if I choose the other one, or this one, because it's the same Photoshop file, I can still just switch between the two different versions very easily. Using adjustment layers is a completely non-destructive way of applying edits to your layers in Photoshop. You can use this even in user interface design to quickly see different color versions of your designs. So if I apply it to all my layers, I can go and select the topmost layer and then go to adjustments and choose, for example, hue saturation. Here, if I change the hue, that will give me a very quick version or color version of my original design. So if I want to go to the purple side, I can do that very quickly and easily. I can also use colorize if I want to turn all the colors into a monochrome scale, or I can go back to have the different hues. And the good thing about adjustment layers is that it's very easy to turn on and off by just simply change the layer visibility. And if I want to use an adjustment layer on a specific layer, so for example on that white bit there on the top, I can drag it to that layer and alt click between the two of them. So now it will only affect that layer. And if I change the color of that layer, you can see the effect will only apply to that layer. So that's a clipping mask applied on the adjustment layer, which I can always change by again alt clicking between the two layers. So using adjustment layers to change colors quickly and efficiently and also non-destructively is a great thing. But it's good to know that you have lots of other adjustment layers as well, which you can work with in Photoshop. Working with vector shapes is also essential whenever you work in Photoshop because they can again save you a lot of time whenever you need to make adjustments. So I have a rasterized version, for example, of this text box here, which is this bubble background copy. As we can see, I can turn it on and off and the text is on a separate layer. But what if I want to change the size of this text box? In that case, I can use the free transform tool and try stretching this, but you will see that it will stretch the shape as well, and you will get this really unwanted effect when the radius is completely stretched and distorted. So instead of doing that, I'm going to delete this background, and I'm going to show you what happens when you do this with the vector shapes. So in this bubble background layer, I have everything set up as vector shapes. So as you can see, I can even select the little tail separately because they are two shapes but combined into one vector shape layer. So when I select this main part here, I can very easily use the free transform tool and stretch it down without affecting the radius, because that is a live shape property in the properties panel that will stay 30 pixel even if I resize the shape itself. And then if I want to now, I can move this tail down here and align it to the shape itself, and then everything looks perfect even though I made a change to its size. It's good to know that live shape properties is a new feature in Creative Cloud, so you won't find that option in previous versions of Photoshop. Another good idea is to save swatches for the colors that you use in your designs. In this case, I have this blue color used a couple of times here, and at the moment it's not saved as a swatch. So it will be quite difficult to be consistent and make sure I can update the colors very quickly and easily without even using adjustment layers. So for example, if I change the color of that circle there, I can do it by double clicking on the layer itself and then change it from the color picker. But that won't affect the other two colors here. So what I can do is, before actually changing the color, I will add this blue color to the swatches. So here in the color picker, I click on add to swatches and I can call it main color. So that will be now here in the swatches panel. And now if I change any of the colors, maybe for this circle here by accident, and then I want to go back to the original blue colors, I can just quickly select it from the swatches and press Alt backspace to apply it to the layer. Alt backspace will apply the foreground color. So once again, at this top base here, if I change its color, again, I change it to something different, and then I select the swatch which I've saved and Alt backspace, that will very quickly and easily apply it back and keep it consistent with the swatch that I saved. It's also good to know that you can share swatches between Photoshop documents by clicking on the panel menu and choose Save Swatches. Even if you want to use it in InDesign or Illustrator, then you can use Save Swatches for exchange. Also important to make sure that you don't have empty, unnecessary layers in your Photoshop files. And that's something you can do in two ways, to get rid of them. First, you can do it automatically from the File menu. So you can go into Scripts and choose Delete all empty layers. That's quite useful. But you can also use filtering in the Layers panel by using Attribute and then choose Empty. So there you can see we have 3 empty layers. And if I want, I can select these and delete them. So this is the manual way, but it might be useful to see which are those layers. Maybe you name them something, and that means they should have some content on them, but by accident you deleted them. Or if you are sure that you don't need any of your empty layers, just use the script that I showed you from the File menu. And that's all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. So 10 ways to create professional and organized PSD files. I hope you found this useful. And if you're interested to learn more about Photoshop, make sure you join me next time as well. Thanks a lot for your attention.